Chapter 97. The king of the colony, Carmaxes III, wore a deeply troubled expression. The reason for his headache stood proudly before him, the colony's first Babaraga, seal rang. So, Carmaxes unknowingly dragged out his words as he pondered what to say next. After a brief hesitation, he continued. You're saying you want to attend the conference as an aide? Yup. Seal Rang nodded without hesitation. Seeing this, Carmaxes let out a heavy sigh. This was the same Seal Rang who had always insisted that, come what may, she would never set foot in a conference like this. And now she wanted to go as an aide? What on earth had brought about this change? Of course, there was no issue with Seal Rang accompanying him as an aide. In fact, it was an opportunity too good to pass up for Carmaxes. The Allied Kingdoms Conference was not just a meeting, it was also, as always, a subtle power struggle among the Allied nations. That was precisely why Carmaxes had considered bringing her along in the first place. However, there was one problem. Didn't you say before that you'd never go? Carmaxes had already heard from Seal Rang herself that she'd rather die than attend such a conference. Because of this, he had promised to take someone else as his aide, the colony's second Babaraga, Macria. My mind's changed, Seal Rang replied. Do you absolutely have to go? Carmaxes asked cautiously. Yes, I have to. Are you sure? Absolutely. Her firm and unyielding tone left no room for negotiation. Carmaxes felt at a loss. Frankly, it wasn't an easy decision. Sure, taking Seal Rang would be much more advantageous for Carmaxes. However, breaking his promise to the second Babaraga, who had already agreed to serve as his aide, would undoubtedly cause problems. Of course, if he were to disregard the position of aide, bringing both Babaragas wouldn't be an issue. But that would create complications of its own. In essence, attending a conference as an aide carried a certain level of prestige. Macria, the second Babaraga, had likely agreed to the role for that very reason. If Seal Rang were to accompany them now, even if Macria was formally appointed as the aide, the attention would inevitably shift to the first Babaraga. After all, Seal Rang was an unparalleled force, her strength unmatched by anyone. In short, Macria would undoubtedly feel slighted, her dissatisfaction boiling over. How about attending the next conference instead? Carmaxes suggested, regretting that he hadn't addressed this sooner. Oh. The moment the question left his mouth. I said I want to go. The playful wagging of her tail from just moments ago vanished, replaced by a frosty demeanor that sent chills through anyone who saw her. As you wish, Carmaxes replied reluctantly. He had no choice but to agree. HMPH tilde? Wearing a satisfied expression as if she had gained everything she wanted, Seal Rang hummed a tune as she exited the royal palace. Watching her retreating figure, Carmaxes rubbed his tired eyes. Today feels like a day for some magical herbs, he thought briefly to himself. Meanwhile. So, you're saying you want to attend the conference? Yes, Your Majesty. But the third sword was already assigned to go to the conference. I would like to go, Your Majesty. It's already a settled matter, though. I still want to go. A similar scene was unfolding in Caliban. King Palmarian IV of Caliban looked visibly perplexed as he turned to Deus Macallion and asked. Didn't you decline before, saying you didn't have time? Echoing the same words as a certain king from the desert, Palmarian IV seemed taken aback. I have managed to make time, Deus Macallion replied casually, as though he had simply changed his mind. Faced with Deus' light-hearted change of stance, Palmarian IV closed his mouth, unsure of what to say. It wasn't as though he didn't want to bring Deus along. The king was well aware that the Allied Kingdoms Conference, in name a diplomatic meeting, was in truth a stage for subtle yet intense power struggles. However, Deus had already declined the role of aide, leading Palmarian IV to appoint the third sword to the position instead. For Palmarian IV, Deus' request now felt burdensome. Even as king, he couldn't simply overturn decisions as he pleased. In fact, he knew better than anyone that the higher one's position, the more strictly they had to uphold commitments. A king must inspire trust in their subjects, after all. After a long moment of deliberation, Palmarian IV finally spoke. Regrettably, I cannot grant your request. Why not? Because I've already made my promise. With the third sword, I presume. Yes. As he nodded, continuing his conversation with Deus, Palmarian IV began to faintly grasp the reason behind Deus' sudden interest in the conference. It's because of now Marquis Palacio, isn't it? The news that the Marquis Palacio from the Kingdom of Asteria would be attending the conference as an aide must have spurred Deus to come running. It was somewhat amusing to admire someone so much. Palmarian knew all too well how deeply Deus Macallion revered Marquis Palacio. How could he not? At the regular Five Swords meetings held every few months, the moment the word mage was mentioned, Deus would inevitably sing praises of Marquis Palacio. At one point, the newly appointed Fourth Sword had grown so fed up with Deus' repetitive stories about the Marquis that they made a dismissive comment about him. That ended in a duel where the Fourth Sword was beaten within an inch of their life. As such, anyone who knew Deus Macallion was well aware of his reverence for Marquis Palacio. It was also widely rumored that one should never even utter the word mage in Deus' presence. King Palmarian, while somewhat worried about how Deus might react if he pushed too hard, was caught off guard when Deus simply nodded and stepped back. I understand. Palmarian couldn't help but show a surprised expression. He had expected Deus to resort to something, or perhaps anything, to secure the aide position. However, Deus instead bowed politely and said, "Since the decision has already been made, it would be improper for me to insist further. Thank you for understanding." "It's nothing, Your Majesty." Deus courteously excused himself and left the room, leaving Palmarian momentarily bewildered. But exactly one day later, Palmarian received an audience request from the Third Sword, who was scheduled to attend the conference as his aide. "I greet the ruler of Caliban and the master of its 5 great swords." "Yes, what brings you here?" "Forgive my impertinence, Your Majesty, but may I resign from the position of aide?" "Suddenly?" "Yes." "Why?" "Well, I feel as though my sword is not yet sharp enough to properly serve Your Majesty." Upon hearing this, Palmarian IV was struck by a flash of realization, recalling the events of the previous day. "I cannot grant your request." "Why not?" "Because I've already made my promise." "With the Third Sword, I presume?" "Yes." It didn't take long for him to piece together what had happened. "Understood," Palmarian finally said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." And so, that day, Caliban's aide for the conference was replaced. 3 weeks later. After barely 2 weeks of rest, Alone found himself back in Tyria, heading to turn with Cretinia Scion for the conference. During the brief period of respite, Alone had come to understand why Cretinia Scion had chosen him as her aide. A power struggle, huh? Recalling what Evan had told him, Alone continued to mull over the situation. Sure, whenever people with power gather, petty contests of strength are practically inevitable. Still, why was I chosen for this? Or maybe I am the right choice? Objectively speaking, Alone's track record was rather impressive, so he could understand why he had been chosen. Of course, it was all superficial. In reality, he was a half-baked mage whose tiny mana core made him incapacitated after just a few spells. Well, it's a win-win in the end. Cretinia Scion would leverage Alone's reputation, and Alone would obtain the item he could only get by entering turn. About a week later, they reached their destination. Oh. In the distance stood a massive castle, built solely for the royal families of the allied kingdoms to use as a meeting venue. Alone marveled silently at the sight. Nestled in the middle of an expansive plain, the outer castle had a certain charm, and its exterior was undeniably impressive. Although it resembled a fortress of iron and blood more than a meeting hall, it was still striking. Before long, Alone arrived at the castle. "The meeting is in the evening, so take some time to relax in the banquet hall," Scion instructed. "Understood," Alone replied with a nod and made his way to the hall. Surprisingly, there aren't many people here. Upon arriving at the banquet hall, Alone glanced around at the quiet interior, briefly pondering the lack of activity. Shrugging, he began to snack on the array of desserts laid out before him. Ideally, he would have preferred to get moving and secure the item he was after. Unfortunately, due to its nature, the item could only be obtained at night. Delicious. As he indulged in the sweetness of an egg tart, savoring the flavor, a voice called out to him. "Excuse me, are you Marquis Palacio?" Turning toward the voice, Alone saw a man standing nearby. He had striking red hair, a cross-shaped earring on one ear, and a sword at his waist, a textbook example of a dashing figure. "Yes, I am." "Who are you?" "Oh, it really is you. What an honor to meet you." The man beamed and introduced himself. I am Filion, eldest of the ducal house of Mackillion in the kingdom of Ashtalon. Filion? The swordmaster of Ashtalon. Oh? You know of me? It's an honor to be recognized by someone as famous as you. It seems I've gained a bit of renown myself, Filion said with a cheerful laugh. Watching the lively man, Alone thought to himself, well, it's not so much because you're famous, I already knew about you. Alone was familiar with him, Filion Mackillion, the youngest swordmaster in the kingdom of Ashtalon and a character who eventually joined the player as an ally in *psychedelia. You're well known. The youngest swordmaster of your kingdom, after all. Thank you for the praise. But, as seen, Filion's personality was as cheerful and straightforward as it appeared. True to his role as an ally in the game, he had no hidden agenda and was refreshingly pleasant to interact with. However, there was one drawback. You seem weaker than I expected, Marquis. The character's design clearly emphasized that all their talent and focus were concentrated on swordsmanship. As a result, their interpersonal and social skills were almost hopelessly lacking. That's strange. You should be much stronger than this, Filion said, his words blunt and direct, reflecting the thought clearly written on his face. To top it off, he also had a rather strong competitive streak. HMPH. Alone, however, fully understood that Filion had no ill intent. Filion Mackillion wasn't the kind of person to mock or ridicule someone. Whether it's because he's incapable of malice or just not clever enough to think of it, who knows? Regardless, the sincerity in his tone made it clear there was no hostility. Alone briefly pondered how to respond to such innocent bluntness when. What did you just say? Who? A voice from behind caught both of them off guard, making Alone instinctively turn around. The sight before him made his eyes widen in surprise. Sealrang and Deus. There they stood, Sealrang and Deus, both visibly furious. Their expressions left no doubt about their mood, and they were glaring directly at Filion. Chapter 98. Mikado had returned to the magic tower for the first time in nearly 2 years. Initially, he had planned to leave the tower immediately after taking care of a few matters. The reason was simple: 3 years ago, he had discovered a fascinating magical structure. It was something that appeared to date back to the forgotten era of gods, something so extraordinary that it might potentially help him break through the barrier of the 8th tier and ascend to the next level. Thus, Mikado, who had been tirelessly traveling across the Empire's territories, excluding the currently inaccessible Imperial zones, intended to only gather the necessary items and leave once again. Tower Master, I have some interesting news, one of the professors from the Blue Tower said, approaching him. What kind of news? It seems someone has fallen for the Deputy Tower Master. Oh. If it weren't for the fact that the news came from a professor Mikado was close to, he might not have paid it much mind. Tell me more, Mikado said, intrigued. The professor began recounting the events in detail, explaining everything that had transpired. That's how it is. Oh. As soon as the professor finished, Salame Mikado nodded repeatedly, a look of growing interest on his face. Then, in a voice tinged with curiosity, he asked, but in the end, doesn't this mean Penia denied it completely? Well, that is true. However, don't they say that a strong denial often implies a strong affirmation? A strong denial is a strong affirmation. Salame stroked his beard in thought. Could that be true for Penia? Unconsciously, he began picturing Penia in his mind. She was undoubtedly a brilliant pupil, someone even Salame himself, a recognized genius, could not help but acknowledge. However, she had a fiery, headstrong personality and an underlying sense of superiority that made her difficult to deal with. Thinking about it further, he realized that if anyone could act in such a way, it might indeed be Penia. It was entirely possible that she would dismiss even natural emotions like affection as a loss if she admitted to them first. Indeed. If it's Penia, that could very well be the case. Right. Yes. Salame nodded in agreement, recalling Penia's unwavering determination to win no matter the cost. Even if she denied it vehemently, her pride made it likely that she would never willingly admit to such feelings. Of course, if Penia had overheard this conversation, she might have erupted in fury, unleashing magic across the entire tower. But oblivious to that possibility, Salame mulled something over before speaking again. In that case, should I do something to help? Well, I suppose that wouldn't be a bad idea. At the professor's suggestion, Salame let out a thoughtful hum and began to consider. For someone like him, who spent his entire life immersed in magic and had little interest in anything else, the idea of his headstrong, prideful student developing a romantic attachment was undeniably amusing. Peenia having someone she admires? Come to think of it, haven't they been entangled for a long time? Selene dredged up an old memory he had almost forgotten due to his relentless pursuit of magical studies. If I remember correctly, wasn't it that noble who eliminated the poem? Yes, I distinctly recall Peenia looking unusually dejected back then. As he revisited these long-buried memories, Selene, a detached middle-aged observer, found the situation increasingly entertaining. With a smile that suggested he had made up his mind, he said, "In that case, I might as well lend a hand in my own way. I'll meet them first and see how things go." He smiled, as if he had decided on a course of action. Meanwhile, Peenia, unaware of the Tower Master's quiet arrival, was in the middle of yet another outburst. "What? Again? Why yes. Lost? Again? Another one? Well, I checked everything thoroughly, and everything was fine until departure. I told you to check every single day. I did, of course, every single day. But when we arrived at the tower today, it suddenly vanished. How does that even make sense?" 3 months into a streak of repeated item losses, Peenia's mental fortitude was on the verge of complete collapse. Ah! Her frustration erupted, and as her anger flared to its peak, an image of an expressionless man briefly crossed her mind. Ah! She screamed in exasperation. The weather outside the window remained bright and sunny. Not long after, Alone, who was bewildered by the sudden appearance of Sealrang and Deus, barely had time to process the situation before another voice interrupted. "Who?" "Oh." Filion Merquillon, who appeared behind Alone, momentarily wore a confused expression before his face lit up with recognition. "Wow, no way, are you the first Sword of Caliban and the first Baba Yaga of Colony?" Despite the grim expressions on Deus and Sealrang's faces, Filion beamed with excitement and opened his mouth as if to confirm. "I've always wanted to meet you both, this is fantastic." A cheerful smile spread across his face. However, when he noticed that their expressions hadn't softened in the slightest, Filion looked puzzled. "What's wrong?" It was then that Deus, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Didn't you say that Marquis Palacio, our benefactor, was weak?" Yes. Marquis Palacio is not weak." "Is that so?" Filion glanced slyly at Alone before turning back and replying. "From what I see, he seems weak. Do you want to die?" At that moment, Deus exuded a chillingly murderous aura. "Isn't this a bit much?" Surprisingly, it wasn't Filion who was taken aback by the reaction, but Alone. Sure, hearing someone call you weak wasn't exactly pleasant, but it didn't seem severe enough to warrant such a deadly response. "Isn't this going a little too far?" Just as Alone was about to step in and calm the situation, Filion interrupted. "Well, perhaps I'm wrong. But I'd like to spar with the first Sword of Caliban to confirm. Would that be possible? If Deus wins, I'll admit that Marquis Palacio is strong without question." "Fine." Before Alone could finish his sentence, both men moved simultaneously, heading out of the banquet hall without hesitation. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Although the duel was ostensibly to protect Alone's honor, he had no say in the matter. Now, as he walked towards the dueling grounds, a swishing tail followed close by. "Aid, who?" "Yup. I wasn't planning on coming, but when I heard my mentor would be here, I decided to show up." Sealrang grinned cheerfully, as if to say, "Aren't I amazing?" Hearing the reason for Sealrang and Deus's presence, Alone couldn't help but nod in agreement. It made sense for both of them to attend the meeting. After all, Deus was the first Sword of Caliban, and Sealrang was the first Baba Yaga of the Desert City Colony. Still, one part nagged at him. Is it really okay to stir up this kind of commotion? He glanced ahead at Deus and Filion, who were preparing for their duel. Although the banquet hall was relatively empty, meaning there wasn't much of an audience, the fact that aides were openly engaging in a duel could spark some controversy regardless of the circumstances. Initially, he had considered stepping in to prevent it. However, the timing was poor. Engrossed in conversation with Sealrang, he had already reached the dueling grounds, where the two combatants had drawn their swords, ready to begin. The chance to intervene had unfortunately passed. So, Alone reasoned to himself. Well, it's just a duel. It probably won't cause too much of an uproar. With that, he decided to sit back and watch the duel unfold while quietly mulling over his thoughts. Who will win? No, Alone quickly revised his question. How long can he hold out? While he was aware that both were swordmasters, the outcome seemed obvious. Even among swordmasters, there were tiers of skill. Deus, who had defeated even Reinhard, wasn't going to lose to Filion, a newly ascended swordmaster. He's probably not thinking about winning, or is he? Filion's eyes, brimming with competitiveness and an unyielding fighting spirit, were fixed on Deus. Seeing this, Alone found himself nodding unconsciously. Filion was displaying exactly the kind of determination Alone had witnessed back in Psychedelia, a refusal to surrender, no matter how overwhelming the disparity in skill. He would fight to the bitter end, clinging to the slimmest chance of victory until his last breath. It was one thing to see this in games, but in reality, his personality is unique. As Alone observed Filion's blazing resolve, the rules of the duel were declared. The rules are simple: the duel continues until one side admits defeat. When this dagger hits the ground, the match will begin. With a calm smile, Filion tossed a dagger from his belt high into the air. The blade gleamed against the soft hues of the setting sun as it spun and fell. Then, thud, as the dagger's hilt struck the ground. Crack! The duel was over. What? Filion, stunned, took a moment to realize his situation. He found himself sprawled awkwardly on the ground, utterly defeated without even understanding what had happened. As his vision cleared, he looked ahead and saw Deus Michaelion. The swordmaster stood there, sword in hand, gazing down at him. Filion's confusion gave way to pain as he became aware of the ache in his cheek. Then, it dawned on him. He had lost. Not only that, he hadn't even managed to swing his sword once. He couldn't do anything at all. Ha! Filion let out a hollow laugh, the weight of his defeat sinking in. Had it been anyone else, they might have reacted in one of two ways. Most would have collapsed in despair, overwhelmed by how effortlessly their hard-earned swordsmanship had been rendered meaningless. Others would have denied reality, deifying Deus Michaelion as an unattainable existence and rationalizing their loss as inevitable. They would cling to self-justifications to shield themselves from the crushing weight of failure. Because without such defenses, they would break. But ha ha ha. Filion didn't crumble, nor did he deny reality. Instead, he chose a third path. Wow, honestly. I'm at a loss for words. Determination. Even after being defeated in a single strike, realizing he wasn't even close to being a match for Deus, Filion reignited his fighting spirit and raised his sword again. As Filion's blood boiled with determination. What is this? Alone, observing from the sidelines, turned to Deus with a look of disbelief. He had known. He knew Deus was strong enough to defeat Reinhard. But even so, the idea of Deus dispatching Filion, who was stronger than most swordmasters, in a single instant was beyond his imagination. Is this talent? For a moment, Alone was speechless, marveling at Deus's absurd strength, a power that seemed to have surpassed the limits of humanity in just a few years. Then, his expression softened with pride. While part of him, as someone who could barely muster a single magic spell, envied Deus's overwhelming talent, another part of him felt like a proud father watching his child achieve greatness. However, his attention soon shifted. Now, it was Filion who earned his admiration. Despite being defeated 5 times in a row, each loss coming from a single strike, Filion kept getting back up, refusing to yield. By the 5th bout, still more. Alone could see the fiery determination shining in Filion's eyes. By the 10th bout. Not yet. By the 15th bout. Wow, you're really strong. By the 20th bout. Wait a second. For the first time, Filion raised his hand in a gesture of surrender. But Deus, without a word, sent him flying once again. No, hold on. Crack. Wait. Thwack. Let me. Crack. By the time they had fought 30 more rounds, with Filion unable to utter a full sentence between blows, Alone finally stepped in. Deus, I think it's time to stop now. Understood. Or rather, Alone had to interrupt when Filion's determination finally gave out, and the duel devolved into a one-sided beating. By then, Alone saw something shocking. The ever-determined Filion, who, even in the face of overwhelming disparity, would fight until his last breath as if programmed to never give up. I'm so sorry, I was completely wrong. I'll never do this again, I swear. Had utterly broken. That night, at the Allied Kingdoms Assembly of the Six Kings. So, where is your brilliant swordmaster? The one you were boasting about so much. Whom? Alone, standing behind Crytenia Sion, caught sight of King Stalion V of Ashkelon wearing a deeply displeased expression, his brow furrowed. As their eyes met, Alone quickly averted his gaze, unable to hold the king's reproachful stare. Chapter 99. The United Kingdom is comprised of 8 nations, 3 duchies, and 4 cities. However, only 5 nations serve as the core participants in the coalition and are allowed to attend this council. The Kingdom of Asteria, the Kingdom of Ashkelon, the Kingdom of Caliban, the Kingdom of Colony, the Kingdom of Raxas. While the Holy Kingdom of Rosario could technically participate in the council, it has refrained from doing so for a long time. Even when they attended in the past, it was only under pressing circumstances, and even then, it was representatives below the Pope who appeared. As such, the 5 core nations were effectively the heart of the United Kingdom. That issue isn't something we can handle on our side. You're saying that, even though 30% of the monsters crossing the borders come from your region? Are you seriously suggesting we just let that slide? Shouldn't we strive for coexistence? After all, some of those trade goods. The king seated at the table exchanged greetings briefly before diving into discussions about national policies so intricate that even Alone couldn't fully grasp them. What he did understand was that everyone was striving to secure political gains from this council. Allies and enemies shift with every topic change, Alone mused. When discussing the first agenda, the Kingdom of Asteria and the Kingdom of Caliban were allies, but with the second topic, they became adversaries as if by magic. On the third agenda, they were back to being allies. Observing this political theatre, Alone couldn't help but think. If that's the case, can there truly be such a thing as an incompetent king? He glanced at Carmax's 3, who had appeared at a previous gathering. Gone was the jovial, slightly absent-minded demeanor he had shown back then. Instead, he was now deeply engrossed in the political exchange, unwavering and precise. There may be emotional kings, but there are no foolish ones. Alone marveled at how quickly topics reached resolutions and transitioned into new ones, though he could barely keep up. All right, let's call it a day. After all, we'll be seeing each other for the next 3 days anyway. Thus, the first day of the council concluded. Afterward. Good work, said Sion. Not at all, Alone replied, shaking his head. Truthfully, he hadn't exerted himself much. His role as an attendant was simply to sit in on the discussions and listen to the kings. He hadn't actively contributed to anything. What did you think? She asked. About what, specifically? The council. At her question, Alone paused briefly, pretending to contemplate. In truth, he hadn't understood much of anything. It wasn't that the language was incomprehensible, but rather he couldn't unravel the layered political undertones embedded in their words. Instead, Alone found himself observing Sion. Her demeanor at this council was markedly different from how she had been portrayed in the Psychedelia game. In Psychedelia, she was described as a ruler too lazy to govern, leaving everything to the nobles. And that description seemed accurate. Yet here she was, participating in the political tug-of-war, if not as adept as the other kings. I'm sorry, but it's not my place to judge, Alone finally answered, glossing over his ignorance. At his vague response, Sion chuckled softly. You're being modest. Her amused tone implied she saw right through him. Hiding his discomfort behind a neutral expression, Alone remained silent. Well, no matter. It's fine since I have an additional favor to ask of you. A favor? Alone echoed. Yes. What is it? At his question, Sion revealed her request. If you don't mind, could you visit Rono Valley? Rono Valley? Yes. Are you familiar with it? I am. Rono Valley. While Alone had never visited the place in this world, he knew it well. It was a location he frequented often in Psychedelia and one he had planned to visit as soon as the council concluded. There, you'll find the ruins of Malacca. The ruins of Malacca? Yes. You just need to visit there. At her words, Alone paused in silence before asking. Is there someone there I need to deliver a message to? Or perhaps an item I'm supposed to retrieve? No. You just need to go and come back. Just go and come back. That's right. Alone was puzzled by the cryptic instruction from the Queen. Well, once you're there, you'll understand why I've asked this. Starting from the third day of the council, you don't need to follow me around. Move as you see fit. Leaving Alone with a simple "take some rest," Cyan departed with her attendants, returning to her quarters. For a while, Alone stood in place, his expression subtly perplexed. Back in his room, Alone sat by the window, staring blankly into the distance. He was suddenly reminded of a comment he had once heard from an observer. "Do you find it beautiful?" Unintentionally, Alone glanced up at the sky. The dark night was painted with countless stars, forming a shimmering Milky Way. Some stars blazed brightly beside the moon, while others, small yet distinct, twinkled steadily. Thinking back, the observer had such a strangely bittersweet expression. What could have caused it? Lost in thought, Alone was abruptly startled. "Master!" A familiar face suddenly appeared outside the window, startling him. He struggled to calm his racing heart. "Seal rang." "Yes, Master." "You scared me." "No way." "Master, you didn't look scared at all." But Alone was genuinely startled. Still, he chose to move the conversation along. "So, what brings you here?" "HM? No real reason. I just came to see you." "Just because?" "Yup. I missed you." Seal Rang grinned brightly, wagging her tail like an eager puppy greeting its master, sitting casually on the window ledge. "Is that a problem?" "Not exactly." Alone shifted his gaze toward the crescent moon peeking between the stars, briefly pondering. After a moment, he spoke. "I'm heading somewhere now. Want to come along?" "Sure." Without asking where they were headed, Seal Rang leapt down from the ledge, performing an elegant spin before landing lightly on the ground. Watching her, Alone rose from his seat. He hesitated briefly, as the place he was heading contained an item unique to turn, but... well, it shouldn't matter. She'll keep the secret if I explain it. Traveling with Seal Rang wouldn't cause any problems, Alone decided. However, where we're going is a secret. A secret? Yes. Just the two of us. That's right. Wow. Why the reaction? It's great. Seal Rang repeated the word "two" several times, beaming as she spun her tail like a windmill and perked up her ears. Watching her cheerful reaction, Alone inwardly smiled fondly before stepping out. Alone's destination was Turn's underground prison. The place was pitch black, without even magical lamps to illuminate the path. As he prepared to cast a spell to light the way, Seal Rang chimed in. "Want me to light it up, Master?" "You can do that?" "Of course." With a crackling sound, Seal Rang summoned lightning, and a brilliant light illuminated their surroundings. "How's that? I didn't know you could do that." Together, they ventured deeper into the underground prison, eventually reaching its end. "It should be around here somewhere." Examining the wall, Alone began touching the bricks. Soon, he noticed one that moved unusually loosely. Pressing it precisely, he activated the hidden mechanism. And then... rumble, rumble, rumble. With a mechanical sound, the bricks that had formed a solid wall just moments ago began to shift, one by one, clearing a path. "Whoa!" Seal Rang gasped in amazement as the bricks snapped into place like a machine, forming a doorway. Even Alone, who had seen this scene countless times in the game, couldn't help but feel an adventurous thrill as he witnessed it unfold in real life. Boom! With a final loud noise, the door was complete. Stepping inside, they found themselves in a cavern illuminated by a radiant green glow, its beauty breathtaking. "We have to go a bit further," Alone said. "Okay," Seal Rang replied eagerly. They began walking deeper into the cave. After what felt like about 10 minutes to Alone, they reached the end of the cavern, a spacious chamber bathed in the green light. "Who?" "A human." "Ah." In the chamber stood a tiny fairy, about the size of a child, clad in shimmering blue garments. She looked at Alone with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. Alone let out a soft sigh. "It's Tevet." "Just my luck." The artifact hidden within Turn's underground prison, the Wandering One's hand, was guarded by 5 fairies who took turns standing watch every 2 days. To acquire the artifact, Alone would have to pass a test administered by whichever fairy was on duty when he arrived. And today... TSK. It was Tevet, whose test was infamous for its difficulty. Strictly speaking, the test itself wasn't particularly complex, it was a game of tag. The problem was that Tevet's speed was beyond absurd. She could outrun not only swordmasters but even mags who could chain blink spells. In game terms, while a player could typically move about 8 spaces per turn unless they used special skills, Tevet could move a staggering 106 spaces per turn. It's not just about catching her, you also have to evade her for over a minute. Realistically, it's almost impossible. Even in the game, her trial wasn't meant to be overcome straightforwardly. Instead, players were encouraged to use fairy honey from Rono Valley as bait to distract her. Why couldn't it have been Geppetto or Cometa? No, anyone but Tevet would have been fine. Alone quickly decided to abandon any hopes of obtaining the artifact today. With 3 days left until the council ended, he could return tomorrow or the day after, when a different fairy would be on duty. Turning to Sealrang, he said, "Let's go." "Okay." Without questioning his decision, Sealrang nodded readily. "Ooh? You came all the way here for treasure, didn't you? And now you're just leaving? What a coward." The blue fairy sneered, her tone laced with mockery, as if taken aback by their sudden departure. Alone chose not to respond. He knew engaging with Tevet would only amuse her and waste time. TSK, TSK. Humans, always gobbling up whatever they want without an ounce of determination. You're no better than goblins. Frustrated by Alone's calm retreat, Tevet continued her provocations, clearly disappointed that her game of tag wouldn't take place. Though Alone ignored her, Sealrang couldn't. "Hey. What did you just say? Why? Was I wrong? What did you say about my master?" "Master? Oh, you mean the coward who's running away without even trying the trial?" Tevet smirked. "I called him a coward." As if delighted by her own taunt, Tevet's mocking grin widened, fully expecting her words to rile Sealrang. And indeed, Sealrang's expression made it clear she was ready to take the bait. "If you want to prove me wrong, why don't you face me in a game of tag?" Tevet vanished in a blur, her movements so fast they seemed to defy sight, her voice echoing with smug amusement. "But I wonder, can you even touch the tip of my wing?" Before Alone could attempt to stop her from escalating, he suddenly saw something that made him freeze. Crackle! A golden flash streaked across the chamber, bright and violent. Ack! In an instant, Tevet found herself caught. Sealrang's hand gripped the fairy's neck tightly, holding her in place. Tevet's wide eyes reflected her shock. "Talk!" Sealrang's golden eyes burned with fury as she glared inches from Tevet's face. "What did you just say?" Chapter 100. "I'm so sorry." Alone couldn't say anything as he looked at Tevet, who had her head hung low with a tearful expression. To be fair, even Alone hadn't anticipated this situation at all. Is this even possible? Alone stared blankly at Sealrang, who was beaming with a radiant smile, as if seeking praise, completely different from the menacing golden eye she'd shown earlier. No, but seriously, how did she catch him? Alone couldn't stop marveling at the scene in front of him. It was an utterly unbelievable feat. Capturing Tevet was, in essence, an impossible task. After all, Tevet was akin to a game character capable of moving over 100 spaces in a single turn. How did you catch him?" The question slipped out before he even realized it. Sealrang, tilting her head innocently, replied without hesitation. "I just caught him." Her answer was far too casual. "Oh. Well, it's technically true," Alone thought, "but a lot of details are missing." No, seriously, what on earth? Sure, Alone had already learned from prior experience that Sealrang was fast, but this was beyond his imagination. At this rate, she could probably cross the desert in less than 2 days. No, more than that, she's already way past ordinary levels, just like Deus. He found himself marveling once again at the talents of the 5 great sins. Now that I think about it, she wasn't strong because a god descended upon her. She was just born like this, wasn't she? As he pondered this, Alone couldn't help but feel a bit pathetic about his own small, powerless body. But he quickly shook off his gloom and turned his attention back to Tevet. After all, the current situation was still unfolding. Tevet, whose neck had been grabbed in an instant and who had been threatened by Sealrang, seemed utterly shaken with fear. Seeing her terrified expression, Alone asked, "Does this count as capturing you?" "It counts. It counts." With a furtive glance at the smiling Sealrang, Tevet hung her head in resignation. So, now we're the ones who need to run, right? Ooh? Oh, yes. Tevete nodded hesitantly, her movement awkward and uncertain. Sealrang, can you handle it? Of course, Master. I'm super fast. Sealrang puffed up with confidence, placing her hands on her hips. Alone glanced at Tevete, who looked nervous. Then let's begin. Yes. When the hourglass above my head flips, we'll start. You have 1 minute to run. Despite Tevete's timid demeanor, Alone felt a rising tension. On the surface, Tevete looked like a young girl who hadn't fully grown, but in truth, she was a fairy who had lived for hundreds of years. And as fairies could resurrect even after death, threats to her life didn't intimidate her. Alone, knowing this, suspected Tevete's fear was merely an act to catch them off guard. He carefully observed the fairy, whose hourglass, placed at the center of the arena, began to flip and count down. As expected, Alone noticed the subtle upward curve at the corner of Tevete's lips, belying her frightened eyes. It was a wicked, sly smile. Sealrang, who had been watching Tevete intently, suddenly called out. Master! What is it? If I get caught, can we try again? Try again. Alone glanced at the hourglass, now turned 90 degrees, and replied. Probably. So we can try again. Yes. Alone nodded, recalling the rule that fairies must always accept challenges from humans. And the moment the hourglass completed its rotation and the trial officially began, Tevete didn't move. Neither did Sealrang. Are they moving too fast for my eyes to follow? Without realizing it, Alone had briefly entertained a peculiar thought, but, of course, it wasn't true. The two of them, Tevete and Sealrang, truly hadn't moved at all. Confused, Alone could only furrow his brow in disbelief. Yet even as they stood still, the sand in the hourglass continued to fall steadily. 1 minute later. Wow! I won! Alone turned to see Sealrang raising both arms in triumph, shouting gleefully. Beside her, Tevete hung her head low, her face slightly pale as though still reeling from whatever had just transpired. That day, Alone obtained the artifact known as the Hand of the Wandering One. Thanks to you, he said to Sealrang. For Master? I'd do anything. Radiating confidence and pride, Sealrang's demeanor made Alone feel a warm sense of gratitude. If there's anything you want, I'll grant it. Really? Of course. Well, within reason. If it's too difficult, I'll have to think about it. Tilda, then can I take some time to think it over? Go ahead. They exchanged light-hearted banter as they left the arena. As they approached the entrance to the underground prison, a question popped into Alone's mind. By the way, why were both of you standing still earlier? Earlier? Yes. Tilda, I don't know. She wasn't moving, so I just stood still too. I thought I'd move when she did. Her nonchalant response left Alone staring at her in disbelief. What? Why? Sealrang's innocent expression made Alone shrug and continue walking out of the cave. The incident passed in the stillness of the early morning, with not a single soul around to witness it. The 3 days spent in turn flew by in a blur. By the 4th day, the conference had officially ended, transitioning into a period of camaraderie without any formal meetings. For Alone, this meant, if I'm going to act, I need to act quickly. Having already gained everything he needed, Alone decided to leave without hesitation. Master, you're leaving already? I've got things to do. Oh. Hearing this, Sealrang's tail drooped dramatically. While not as if her world was crumbling, her disappointment was plain for anyone to see. It reminded Alone of a child's endearing pout, prompting him to add, I'll come visit again sometime. Really? Sure. Though he didn't entirely mean it, he knew he'd soon have to travel near her again to meet the Dragonkin. Pacifying her with this promise, Alone bid Sealrang a brief farewell and quickly set off. Shortly afterward, Alone visited Deus to say goodbye. Are you talking about Ronavelli? Deus asked. Yes. Then allow me to accompany you. Alone blinked. Together? Yes. I was already planning to go to Ronavelli. Why? At Alone's question, Deus explained. 1 year ago, Reinhard entered Ronavelli and hasn't returned. So, you're going to find him? Yes. We do have a lead, but none of the knights have been able to bring him back. a lead, but the knights couldn't bring him back. They suspect he's in that Sylvanus sector. Oh. Suddenly, everything clicked for Alone. The knight's inability to retrieve Reinhard now made perfect sense. Of course, the Sylvanus sector. The Sylvanus sector was a vast, unexplored jungle within Ronavelli, one of 3 charted regions, and home to grotesquely mutated monsters. The likelihood of an ordinary knight surviving in the Sylvanus sector was slim. Once inside, they would likely be reduced to nothing but bones. After all, even in the game Psychedelia, the Sylvanus sector wasn't accessible until the mid to late stages of the storyline. Using the Blessing of the Ruins would work, but there's no way the knights would know about that. Recalling the game's mechanics, Alone nodded lightly. All right, I'll go with you. Yes, I'll accompany you. And so, that day, Alone departed for Ronavelli with Deus. Traveling to Ronavelli over several days with Deus turned out to be more enjoyable than Alone had anticipated. When they first boarded the carriage together, Alone had worried it would be an awkward, silent journey, much like their past interactions. However, to his surprise, Deus was unusually talkative this time. Because of that. Seems like we're almost there. It appears so. As the air grew damp enough to soak through their clothes, Alone realized they were nearing the edge of the jungle. He began mentally organizing the tasks he needed to accomplish during their time in Ronavelli. First task, the ruins of Malacca. Alone nodded lightly to himself. Visiting the ruins of Malacca wouldn't be too challenging since he already knew their location from a side quest in the game. Although the game depicted the ruins as being inaccessible due to a collapsed entrance, the real world might be different. Second task, finding the matching bracelet. Reaching into his coat, Alone retrieved a bracelet, one he had recently obtained in turn. By itself, the bracelet had no function or power. The other half should be in the Hermit's Sanctuary. If he could retrieve the other bracelet from the Hermit's Sanctuary and combine the two, the resulting artifact would become invaluable to him in his current state. Third task, preparing for the Forgotten One. The last and perhaps most critical task was to locate an item capable of countering the Forgotten One. Unlike the other otherworldly beings Alone had faced so far, the Forgotten One was already fully manifested in this world. This made it a much greater threat. Phew. How much time had passed as Alone exhaled a small sigh and finished his thoughts? We've arrived. Alone soon realized that they had reached a small duchy bordering the jungle, the territory of Luxable, specifically the domain of Caslot. Climbing out of the carriage, he braced himself for the trek into the jungle. From this point on, they would need to walk to the exploration camp established by mags and adventurers deeper inside the jungle. The trio, Alone, Deus, and their guide, headed straight for the southern gate leading toward the jungle. As soon as they passed through the gate. Sir, it looks like this is your first time here. Do you need a guide? Just tell me your destination, and I'll take you there right away. Hawkers swarmed them, eager to sell their services. It was as if they had been waiting for fresh faces to appear. I expected there to be a lot, but this is far more than I imagined. The area near the exploration camp was a hotbed of relics and ruins, making it a prime location for artifact discoveries. Naturally, this drew a steady stream of adventurers and starry-eyed mercenaries hoping to strike it big. Alone took a step back from the aggressive hawkers. I'm fine. I already know my destination. Oh, come on, sir. This jungle is a maze, and it's all too easy to get lost. Even so, I'll manage. Alone firmly declined, and only then did the hawker reluctantly give up, turning and disappearing into the crowd. There sure are a lot of hawkers here, Evan commented. Indeed, Alone replied. Just as they were exchanging observations. Marquis. Yes? Should I kill that man just now? What? Alone was baffled by Deus's sudden suggestion. Why? He insulted you. He did. Yes, I heard it clearly. Well. While being insulted wasn't exactly pleasant, Alone didn't think it warranted a death sentence. Shaking his head, he dismissed the idea. There's no need for that. As you wish. Deus nodded obediently, though his calm demeanor did little to ease Alone's bewilderment. Still, Alone added, thank you for considering my feelings. Assuming Deus had made the suggestion out of concern for him, Alone nodded appreciatively, albeit with a faint smile. But exactly 5 minutes later. Marquis. What is it now? Should I kill the hawker from earlier? Why this time? He insulted you again after you refused him and walked away. Don't. Understood. By the time they reached the southern gate that led into the jungle, Deus had made no less than 8 offers to kill the hawkers. Each time, he seemed genuinely regretful as he gazed after the offending individuals, his hand absently resting on his sword hilt. At this point, Alone couldn't help but wonder. Wait, did he awaken some kind of bloodlust or something? A strange unease began to settle in Alone's chest. Chapter 101. Even as Alone's head spun from the 8 consecutive assassination threats from Deus, the dizziness was fleeting. By the time Alone navigated through the throngs of mercenaries and adventurers to reach the edge of the jungle. Who? Hearing a familiar voice, Alone turned his head. Count, no, Marquis Palacio. Lianagillas. There stood Lianagillas, the daughter of the Red Tower's leader. It's been so long, Marquis. Congratulations, by the way. It has been a while. Thank you for the congratulations. Smiling warmly, Lian shifted her gaze, only to have her eyes widen in surprise. Surely, is that who I think it is behind you? Deus Macallion. Picking up on the fact that Lian seemed to know Alone, Deus introduced himself briefly. Lian, letting out a quiet wow in admiration, gave Deus a rather peculiar look before hastily clearing her throat. Ahem, so, what brings you two here together? Alone quickly discerned the 2 questions buried within her inquiry. Given that we hail from different nations, it probably seems odd for us to be traveling together like this. Not to mention, Deus's reputation preceded him. Our goals differ, but we're accompanying each other to take care of business in the jungle, Alone explained. Ah, I see. So, is it just the 2 of you? No, there's 3 of us, Alone corrected. At that, Lian made a suggestion. Would you like to travel with us, then? Coincidentally, we're also heading to our camp. Truthfully, with Deus around, whether they traveled as a trio or with a larger group, the likelihood of encountering danger seemed slim. However, the possibility of losing their way or facing unforeseen circumstances wasn't entirely out of the question. Not a bad idea. Alone accepted the proposal. Shortly after, Lian introduced the members of her group to Alone. The party consisted of 15 magicians, 5 mercenaries, and a single guide. However, there was something unusual about the composition. They're not all from the Red Tower. Technically, it's a mix of Green and Red Tower personnel. This expedition is a joint collaboration between the 2, Lian explained. By the time Alone nodded at this explanation. What's this? A slightly gruff voice sounded nearby. Standing there was a man holding a staff as tall as himself, the epitome of what Alone thought a stereotypical magician looked like. Theon, come and greet our guests, Lian called out. Though he furrowed his brows, the man approached, giving Alone, Evan, and Deus a quick once-over before speaking. Introduce yourself. They'll be traveling with us to the camp. This is Marquis Palacio and Deus Macallion. What? Theon's eyes widened in shock at her words, though only for a moment. Greetings. I'm Theon, one of the professors at the Green Tower. You must be the famed swordsman of Caliban and the Marquis Palacio, correct? He quickly composed himself, bowing politely to Deus and Alone. Pleased to meet you. Yes, likewise. After lingering his gaze on Alone for a moment, Theon suddenly turned on his heel and disappeared. He's quite young for a professor. Impressive, Evan remarked, as if aware of the usual age at which magicians earned the title of professor. Lian nodded in agreement. Indeed. The Green Tower considers him an exceptional talent. He's not even 25 yet, but he's already approaching the 5th rank. Wow, the 5th rank. Yes, Lian confirmed, prompting another round of awe from Evan. Meanwhile, Alone remained silent, his expression neutral. After a moment, he murmured softly. Why does it feel like he's only cold toward me? Though Alone didn't usually mind if someone was curt toward him, it was peculiar enough to give him pause. The sudden shift in demeanor after learning his name felt strange. Ah. Lian seemed to realize the situation, offering an awkward smile. Well, it's not really a big deal. Not a big deal. Well, Lian hesitated briefly before confirming that Theon had already gone far ahead, then leaned in to whisper. You know those rumors about you, a Marquis? Rumors? Yes, the ones about Penia. Ah. The truth is, Theon likes Penia. What? Alone turned to look at Theon in genuine surprise. Peenia was undoubtedly beautiful, there was no denying that. But the issue lay with her personality. Alone knew her to have a temperament so destructive that it completely overshadowed her physical charm. He likes that Peenia Chrisin? That insufferable woman. Baffled, Alone questioned her with an incredulous expression. Are you saying that man has feelings for Peenia? Yes. But why? No, wait. Is that rude to ask? Not really. Honestly, I don't understand it myself, Leanne admitted, glancing toward where Theon had disappeared. Especially since Theon once got utterly humiliated by her. Leanne's expression revealed her own disbelief, but she quickly shrugged it off. Anyway, it seems like he's just acting a bit childish because of that. All right, I get it, Alone said, choosing not to press the matter further. Normally, he might have contemplated why a grown man was indulging in such petty jealousy, but his curiosity about Theon's peculiar behavior far outweighed any deeper reflection. Is he a masochist? Just as Alone reached that conclusion. Marquis. There's no need for that. Deus, who had been waiting for the right moment to speak, was immediately cut off by Alone, who responded decisively without even hearing the rest. Understood. Deus reluctantly withdrew his hand from the hilt of his sword, a disappointed look crossing his face. Deus. Yes, Marquis. Have you been experiencing any auditory hallucinations or intrusive thoughts lately? Not at all, Deus replied, looking genuinely puzzled. Despite the denial, Alone's unease only deepened. After some time, Alone and his group continued traveling with Leanne's party toward the exploration camp. Thanks to their diligence, they arrived just before sunset. This feels different, Evan remarked. Does it? Yeah. Honestly, I expected something more primitive, but it's practically a small town. Alone nodded in agreement. True enough. With all the magicians and explorers frequenting this place, it's bound to develop. Are there no monsters here? It's not that there aren't any, but monsters rarely appear in areas where the camps are set up, Alone explained, recounting the lore he remembered from the game. Evan marveled at this, while Alone took in the camp's layout. It feels different compared to the illustrations I saw. Though his memory was faint, the illustrations of this area in a psychedelia gave off the impression of a typical village. However, seeing it in person, the camp felt more like a sprawling, well-organized settlement, a mix of a giant encampment and a town. The mishmash of wooden houses and tents, though chaotic in arrangement, provided everything one might need, from shops to inns. While Alone was lost in thought, admiring the scenery. Marquis, I'll see you tomorrow, Leanne said, preparing to leave. All right. Having learned that Leanne's destination was also the Malacca ruins, Alone had agreed to accompany her group the next day. Let's rest for the night, Alone suggested to his companions. Good idea, Evan agreed. Understood, Deus added. The group entered and into rest for the evening. The next day. The jungle's inherent humidity had disrupted Alone's sleep somewhat, leaving him slightly restless. I'll go look for Reinhard. I'll be back later. All right. Let's meet again tonight. Understood. Do you remember what I told you? If you mean the blessing, yes, I remember. Yes, do your best to receive it before proceeding. It's better to have the blessing if you plan to move in that direction. I'll keep that in mind. Alone and Deus agreed to separate temporarily to accomplish their respective objectives before regrouping. Though I'd rather keep him close. Alone let Deus go without hesitation, knowing that Deus also had his own tasks to attend to. As long as Deus didn't venture into Selvanus or any uncharted regions, there was little risk to his safety. Shortly after, Alone joined Leanne's group without Deus. Deus McCallion won't be joining us. As I said, our goals are different. I see. Leanne appeared somewhat disappointed as they continued their journey toward the Malacca ruins. The sooner we finish in this jungle, the better. Such thoughts filled Alone's mind as they moved forward. Meanwhile, at that very moment, in the deep dungeons of the Holy Kingdom Rosario, reserved only for the vilest of criminals, there was a place known as the Abyssal Prison. Inside that forbidding place, a man with no legs, and a reed, was alive. Despite the searing agony radiating from his body, his face bore a glimmer of hope. I can't die yet. The reason he was still alive, or more accurately, the reason he had been able to possess this man's body, was that the prisoner had been one of the machina components Reed himself had created. By implanting tree-like roots into those connected to his machina, Andereed had managed to transfer his consciousness into the prisoner's body just as his original body was destroyed during the Marquis's attack. Though his body had been utterly shattered, preventing immediate escape, this had been part of his contingency plan. In the abyssal prison, where no one visited save for the occasional delivery of moldy bread, he bided his time, slowly regaining his strength and taking over the prisoner's body completely. Soon, the prisoner's face, covered in crimson roots, morphed into Andereed's own. His legs, too, began to regenerate slowly. As he confirmed these transformations, Andereed gritted his teeth, eyes ablaze with ambition. I won't let it end like this. I'll prepare once again, and create a world where everyone is equal. Gone was the benevolent smile or faith he once carried. Instead, a madness-fueled obsession gave him new hope. At that moment. Who? Andereed saw something. In the abyssal prison, where no one should have been able to enter due to its thick iron doors, stood a man with black hair and piercing blue eyes. The man smiled innocently as he looked at Andereed. Hello. The cheerful greeting left Andereed speechless, or rather, incapable of responding. He couldn't comprehend the situation. But whether Andereed responded or not, the man continued. Well, to be honest, I don't really care about what kind of world you're dreaming of or what you're trying to do. I'm not even that angry. The man's husky voice carried an unsettling casualness as he added. But, you see, messing with His Holiness? Even I can't let that slide. Raising his hand. Snap! Andereed realized, too late, that his neck was twisting against his will. Wait, no. No, stop. Stop it. Stop, 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 stop. Desperate, he flailed and struggled, but... Crack! His neck completed 2 full rotations, and death claimed him. That's what you get for pushing your luck. The man, who had snuffed out Andereed's delusional ambitions, strolled off into the darkness, vanishing without a trace. Left behind was Andereed's lifeless body, eyes wide open in disbelief. Chapter 102. Alone and Evan, along with Leanne's group, began their journey toward the ruins of Malacca. Marquis. It feels like it's getting more humid the deeper we go, Evan muttered, clearly displeased. Indeed, Alone replied, nodding as he noticed Evan's grimace. I knew this place was supposed to be humid, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. It's unbearable, Alone thought, trying to hide his discomfort. He fidgeted with his clothes, feeling the damp texture under his fingers. We need to handle this quickly and get out of here. As they continued walking for a while, someone suggested, let's take a short break. They had reached the midway point of their journey. During the rest, Alone struck up a conversation with Leanne and learned why she and her group were heading to the ruins of Malacca. Malacca is a magical ruin. Magical ruins. Ruins discovered in Ronavelli came in various forms: treasure ruins, heritage ruins, and knowledge ruins, among others. Among them, magical ruins were especially prized by wizards, as they often contained artifacts from the era of forgotten gods. However, wasn't Malacca just another ordinary ruin in the game? He had visited this area countless times while playing Psychedelia, searching for jungle-exclusive artifacts, just as he had during the Raxas segment. The memories of minigames in this jungle were still vivid. It's not confirmed yet, but there's a chance, Leanne replied. Do you have evidence? Alone inquired further. Yes, explorers recently compared certain structures of Malacca's ruins with those of previously discovered magical ruins. They found striking similarities using maps created by explorers, Leanne explained. This was new information to Alone. I was aware of Malacca's ruins, but I never thought it might be a magical ruin. That's intriguing. Right? I wouldn't have known either if it weren't for Theon. Based on the report sent to the camp, I thought it was just a typical ruin. This discovery is all thanks to Theon, Leanne said. At her words, Alone glanced at Theon, who was resting a bit further away. Theon briefly met his gaze but quickly looked away, as if feigning ignorance. Alone found it odd but didn't dwell on it. So, could Malacca's ruins hold artifacts from the Forgotten Era? Alone asked. Leanne tilted her head thoughtfully. I think it's unlikely. When explorers and wizards first discovered Malacca's ruins, they reported finding nothing. If anything, we might only find academic materials. Alone nodded in agreement, but then Leanne turned the question on him. By the way, Marquis, what brings you to the ruins? Alone hesitated for a moment before giving a vague response. Someone I know made a request. A request? Yes, they asked me to visit the ruins of Malacca. Leanne seemed curious but recognized Alone's reluctance to share more and chose not to press further. Alone appreciated her discretion and changed the subject. By the way, is it all right to share this kind of information so casually? I didn't know any of this before. Oh, Leanne nodded, understanding his concern. It's fine. Even though the ruins bear similarities to magical ruins, the chance of them being one is extremely low. And the likelihood of finding artifacts is practically zero. Any academic findings would end up being shared publicly anyway, so there's nothing to hide. When she finished her explanation, Alone asked, "So, is your purpose here simply to confirm whether Malacca's ruins are magical ruins?" Exactly. The Red Tower excels at interpretation, while the Green Tower specializes in detection, so we've collaborated for this expedition. Leanne then explained how the magical exploration team had come together for this mission. Once this expedition is over, you'll be leaving immediately, right? Alone asked. Unless there's another unexplored area up north waiting to be examined, that's probably the plan. An unexplored area in the north. Alone muttered to himself, recalling what he knew about that northern region. That place. In the future, it'll undoubtedly become one of the territories of the four great factions, the Hyaki, 100 Ghosts. The Hyaki. They emerged in the mid to late stages of psychedelia, wreaking havoc alongside the 5 great sins that descended during that era. Known for transforming an already crumbling allied kingdom into a complete disaster, the Hyaki's members, including their boss, were infamous for their nightmarish difficulty. Especially the boss of the Hyaki, the King of Aberrations, still makes my blood boil just thinking about it. The unexplored northern region, it might be better to avoid exploring it. Why is that? I've heard from someone I know that it might be a bit dangerous, Alone replied. The 4 great factions, much like the foreign gods in the setting, typically remain dormant unless the 5 great sins awakened and descended. Alone, in a rare show of goodwill, offered his advice. Let's move out again. He stood up, leaving behind a confused Leanne. Hopefully, it'll be fine, he thought, though a fleeting unease crossed his mind as he briefly recalled Deus. The damp, oppressive morning carried on. After some time had passed, the group finally arrived at the Temple of Malacca. With the sky overcast, it was difficult to gauge the time. Let's head straight in. Knowing the ruins weren't a designated danger zone, the wizards wasted no time. They entered the inner areas with their hired mercenaries and guides, each eager to begin their exploration. Shall we go in as well? Evan asked. Yes. Alone, who had been observing the ancient pyramid-like structure of the ruins, stepped forward alongside Evan. Inside, the ruins bore signs of long-standing moisture, with moss covering the crevices between the stones. As they ventured further, Alone suddenly recalled something Cretanea Scion had said. You'll understand why once you're there. Truthfully, Alone still couldn't fathom Scion's intentions in sending him here. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't even guess a plausible reason. What could it be? Lost in thought, Alone was jolted back to reality by Evan's comment. Oh, it's cooler in here. At that moment, Alone finally took in the interior of the ruins. There was truly, quite literally, nothing. Apart from moss-covered rocks, the only notable feature was a massive stone slab at the center, large enough to easily accommodate 100 people. Beyond that, it was just an expansive empty space. What could anyone hope to learn from this place? Alone wondered. As he stood in the slightly cooler interior, Scion's cryptic words echoed in his mind. Alone scanned the barren ruins once more. As his gaze slowly shifted upward, he noticed something. What appeared to be a drawing was, in fact, text. Alone immediately recognized it as writing in his mind, understanding it naturally as though it were ingrained in him. He'd experienced something similar before when examining a tablet in ruins once inhabited by the dragonkin. Egg of the Sacred Dragon. Despite the wear of time, the inscription was clearly legible. Stasis, he murmured, reading the phrase beneath it. Thunk. From somewhere far away came the sound of something massive shutting. Crack. A sharp, shattering noise followed. So it really isn't likely that this is a magical ruin, even if it bears some similarities, Leanne thought, still gazing at the previously empty ruins. But then, a sudden cracking noise pulled her attention. One of the Green Tower wizards, who had entered with her just moments ago, lay collapsed on the ground. His head had been blown apart. Crunch, crunch. Whir. Nearby, grotesquely large insects feasted on the wizard's corpse. Ooh. What the hell is that? This is insane. One wizard, unable to contain their disgust, vomited, while others screamed in horror. But soon, they all began preparing spells, directing their focus toward the monstrous insects, which were now emerging in greater numbers throughout the vast ruins. Why are jungle mutants here? Leanne couldn't comprehend the situation, but there was no time to dwell on it. She too began preparing her magic. However, she soon realized a shocking truth. Why isn't magic? It was simple yet terrifying. Magic could not be manifested. As the insects began to gather, Leanne frantically tried again to cast magic, her expression growing more desperate, but her efforts were in vain. The mana, it's dispersing. The moment she released her mana for spell formation, it scattered uncontrollably into the air. Realizing this, she was struck with terror. Ha! A sigh echoed through the chamber, drawing the attention of Leanne and the other wizards. Close call, said Theon, standing tall among the swarm of insects. Theon. Leanne called his name in disbelief. Theon, standing over the corpse of a green tower wizard, wore a clear smile, a grin filled with mockery. You look like you don't understand, he said, his tone dripping with derision. Leanne's face hardened at his obvious sneer. Do you even realize what you're doing? She demanded. Oh, are we doing this? A lecture? Sorry to disappoint you, but spare me. I've heard enough sermons to last a lifetime. And don't worry, I know exactly what I'm doing. Seems like you're the one in the dark here, though, Theon replied nonchalantly. What? Leanne asked, her confusion deepening. Theon chuckled. If you knew what I was about to do, you wouldn't be looking so calm. With that, he drew a dark, pitch-black staff from his robes and waved it lightly. At that moment, one of the insects, resembling an oversized mosquito, stabbed its sharp proboscis into the chest of the wizard's corpse. In a grotesque display, it tore out the heart with a spray of blood. Theon retrieved the heart from the insect's maw and tossed it to the center of the arena. The heart thumped violently, spreading blood across the enormous space. Leanne tried again to use magic, but Theon cut her off. Oh, don't bother. Now that the trial has started, magic won't work inside this ruin. Trial? She asked, alarmed. That's right. A trial to determine who's worthy of claiming the magical relics in this place, Theon explained with a casual shrug. I should mention, he added, I don't hold any grudges against you all. The only reason I brought you here is because I needed the hearts of at least 10 wizards. With a sly grin, he continued, apparently, only wizard hearts will do, something I heard from someone. Anyway, I had no other choice. Theon's demeanor turned unnervingly jovial, as though all his prior silence had been a facade. Still, I'll admit I was worried for a moment. Bringing the Marquis of Palacio wasn't a problem since he's a wizard, but that monster with Caliban's sword? Now that was nerve-wracking. I even debated how to hold out until the Marquis left. But now that I can begin the trial on the very first day? Well, I'm just incredibly grateful. Theon shot a mocking glance at Alone before turning back to the others. Well then, I'll take my leave. Don't worry, your hearts will be put to good use. With a wave of his dark staff, the mutated insects spread their wings and took flight. So, this is the end. Leanne watched in despair as her mana, no matter how much she poured out, dispersed uselessly into the air. Her face twisted with hopelessness. Crackle! A sharp sound broke through the chaos, drawing her gaze. There, in front of Alone's outstretched hand, glowing magic shone brightly. The wizards, who moments ago had been drowning in despair, stared at the light as if entranced. Theon's smug grin faded, first into confusion, then into sheer disbelief. Stasis. Alone, having deciphered the only solution to using magic in this space, calmly recited the incantation.